It was the 4th of July 1946. Gathered on a large hill outside of a Polish city, which had suffered a huge amount during World War II, were around 20,000 people. They were there to witness one of the most historic and shocking executions of war criminals. Brought out in front of a huge crowd were female concentration camp guards and a number of men who had worked inside of a local camp, Stutthof Concentration Camp. Stutthof was a place where there was a huge amount of suffering during World War II, and where inmates were sent to the gas chambers. The method of execution was hanging by gallows, public hanging on a huge set of gallows, which were constructed to allow two condemned people to be strung up from the same wooden structure. But this was a public execution, something which some Allied nations considered medieval and barbaric, but to the people of Gdansk this was vengeance and ultimately justice. In this video we look at what it was like for those people who witnessed the Stutthof camp executions, and what it was like stood in front of the gallows that day. To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe. At the end of World War II, there was a need by many Allied nations and countries who had been placed under occupation to punish people who had put their population to the sword. This included traitors, but also those who had worked inside of the concentration camps, which had been set up within the borders of a nation by occupying Nazi forces. Stutthof Concentration Camp opened up around 30 kilometers to the east of the city of Danzig, or Gdansk, and it was sheltered in a marshy and wooded area. It opened pretty much as soon as the Germans invaded Poland, and people began to be sent there who were rounded up in the local area. Throughout the war, around 110,000 people found themselves locked up within the barbed wire fences of Stutthof, and around 65,000 died from disease, starvation, execution, poor treatment, or enforced evacuations or death marches, and disease also ran rampant at Stutthof too. As the Second World War rolled on, there was a shortage of labour at the camp, and auxiliary guards were brought in, and in 1942, the first female German SS guards arrived at Stutthof along with female prisoners. In total around 300 women worked at the camp, including a number who were later sentenced to death. A gas chamber was established within the camp, as was a crematoria to deal with the bodies of those who died. Also gas vans were brought in to kill even more, and the guards of Stutthof drove many to their deaths. Some former prisoners later stated that entering the camp was a death sentence in itself, and many knew the fate that would greet them. The guards were encouraged to inflict horrific amounts of violence and death upon the prisoners, and they carried out executions in public too. As the war turned against the Germans, the concentration camps began to be evacuated as the Allies and the Red Army approached. Stutthof was evacuated with ruthlessness. People were marched to the sea, and they were then shot, and those who could not keep up with the death march were executed and left at the side of a road. But many of the guards went on the run and tried to slip back into civilian life. The Polish wanted justice at the end of the conflict, as millions of their population had been slaughtered, and inside of Gdansk, people were hunting for the guards of Stutthof. There would be hundreds who never managed to get their day in court, but some did. The first Stutthof trial took place from the 25th of April to the 31st of March, and there were 13 former guards and members of staff inside of Stutthof who were brought in front of the judge. The verdicts themselves indicated the anger. Sentenced to death were 12 of the 13 defendants, including 5 women. These women were Jenny Wanda Bachmann, Elizabeth Becker, Eva Paradis, Wanda Klaff and Gerda Steinhoff. Each of them became infamous for their brutality. Bachmann was known as Mad Jenny, for example, and they all murdered innocent people, sending them to their deaths in the gas chambers. They got involved in selections at the camp, and for this they had to pay. The executions were scheduled for the 4th of July 1946, and days before, 5 huge sets of gallows had been created to carry out the hangings. This included a special triple gallows in the centre of the sets, and each of the gallows must have been around 20 feet high at least. They were made in this way to give the crowd a good view, so that everyone could see what was happening. On the day of the executions, it was claimed by the Polish press that around 50,000 people attended the executions on the Biskupia Gorka, a large hill in Gdansk, but this figure has been debated, and at least 20,000 were there to witness the executions. The crowd was described as a great crowd, and this was not just a quick proceeding. It was for the Polish a celebration of the end of the war and vengeance, but it also helped draw a line for some under their suffering. The Polish clergy had days before spoken out about a public hanging, and they were right to be critical, as this was a medieval-style spectacle. There were food stalls set up, and ice cream was even freely available, so that people could eat whilst seeing life be taken in front of their very eyes. Some local vendors sold goods and programmes to document what the condemned had done, and some even made a significant amount of money from the executions. The method of execution was also decided: forced spectacle, slow strangulation. The gallows had been made with no drop at all, meaning that the victims, once the platform they were stood on was removed and the noose was secured around their necks, they would kick and struggle, sometimes for minutes, as their life was literally choked out of them. The struggles of death and the fight could last for around 20 minutes, until the body went finally limp and life and air was choked out of them. The executions were also prolonged, and were designed to have been at 12-minute intervals, meaning that those who followed the first execution had to see what was in store for them, and those who went last had to witness executions for almost 2 hours. It was a shocking sight for anyone who watched. Now when the time came, the condemned guards were brought out in front of full view of the gallows to see the spectacle, and they were booed and harassed by the crowd, and guards stood by to ensure that nothing stopped the sentences being carried out. The women were executed first, as this was seen as courteous. First brought out for her execution was Jenny Wanda Bachmann, and she was helped up onto the back of a truck, which was parked under the gallows. Now the execution process itself was rather special, and it was unique. The trucks were reversed under the gallows by a driver, and they had an open back, which acted as a scaffold. The executioner would place the noose around the neck, then the driver drove off slowly, leaving the condemned hanging and swinging. When Bachmann was helped up onto the truck, one of the first things people would have seen was that the executioner was actually a former prisoner of Stutthof, and some even wore their camp uniforms, the striped pyjamas, and this was seen as the prisoners enacting vengeance upon those who held them in submission. It was revenge. It wasn't a skilled executioner who secured the noose. There was an executioner on the platform who did give instructions and checked things, but also on the truck was an official who read out the death sentence and reminded the crowd of the crimes of the Stutthof guards. The crowd would boo and shout like it was medieval theatre. The condemned were then helped onto a small stool or a step, and the executioner passed the noose over the top of the gallows, and then secured the noose around the neck. They didn't fasten it too tightly, and then there was a knock on the top of the cab of the truck. This was the instruction for the driver to move off, and he then slowly drove forward. As the truck moved, panic set in, and the condemned knew that they would be left hanging. The bodies were left swinging wildly for a matter of minutes, and also the former guards kicked and struggled as the nooses snapped taut around their necks. The condemned took minutes to go still, as mentioned, sometimes as long as 20 minutes, until death finally occurred. All this happened in view of the next condemned person to be executed, and the others, meaning it would have been terrifying for them to see. The bodies of the executed were also left up for some time, and they were eventually cut down and were placed inside of a wooden coffin. It's believed that the bodies were then donated to medical science, and may have been used in the study of anatomy by students in a local university. Another thing which was noticeable to those who witnessed was that the Stutthof guards were not hooded, meaning that the crowd saw every facial expression exhibited during the throes of death. Most of them did seem to accept their fate too, and went to the gallows calmly, but one man and 2 women did put up a fight and struggled with their guards. One of the executioners was also a woman who executed some of the women, she being a former female concentration camp inmate. For those who witnessed the executions of the Stutthof guards that day, one striking thing would have been that many of the guards were very young, including the women. Some were in their early 20s, meaning they were even younger when they inflicted such suffering and terror. But the executions were witnessed by dozens of thousands of people, and they were a pivotal moment in retribution at the end of World War II. Poland had suffered a huge amount during the war, and the invasion of the nation saw the whole conflict across Europe break out. But thousands had been executed, shot and gassed within the concentration camps set up inside of the nation. To those who saw the public execution, they viewed a tiny piece of justice that day against those who brought their suffering, and they saw that they would be finally punished. Thanks for watching. To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe, and once again, thank you so much for watching.